Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Have your attention, please. All quiet, please. Thank you. Go ahead, take out your notes. We're going to continue with the World War II. Thank you for getting the Schindler's List permission slips in. If you can get those in on Tuesday of next week. I don't know if actually we're going to see you Tuesday of next week, but definitely Thursday of next week. Okay? And then come in prepared for the quiz Thursday of next week. By the way, I'm sure Mrs. Rao appreciated that I at least gave you like a little bit of a preview on the whole advisory thing, because that was really supposed to be like, given to the second period as, I don't know, it ended up being a little bit of a shock to them. We spent a lot of time discussing that, but ultimately I think there was an understanding, and I think there's a little bit of wrinkles here, there, and everywhere. For my part, if you've got below a C in here and you're doing the essays to pick up some points, I think it was at like 6.5, 7 points or so forth, get those into me. I can look at those and evaluate those very quickly and update your grade like right away on that. And of course that's not that's available to everyone. Everyone actually has that opportunity in order to get more points because there were no absolutely perfect scores. There was a wide range of scores on that test. And the advice, again, going into the World War II test, since we just started that unit, go over your notes on a regular basis. That's kind of the homework, in addition to working on your IA and getting that in good shape. Yeah?
Is the quiz next week or the week after that? Because it says the 15th is 2.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah, it's like, slow down, Mr. Hanson. Slow down. The SAT is not next Tuesday. It's the following Tuesday. I gave you a pretty good amount of time to get ready for that quiz, didn't I? Because it's not next week. It's the following week. Yeah, good. Thank you. The 15th. Okay, because today is, I don't know what today is, but whatever. It's the 1st, yeah. Yeah. Anybody have any lame April Fool's jokes on them already? Okay, anyway. Announcements? All right, let's go ahead and stand for the pledge. Okay. Oh, for the scavenger hunt. Yeah, talk about that. I'll talk about that afterwards. All right, ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. It's okay. I don't think you're in camera shot, so no one's going to bring that up to you someday and go, we're not going to hire you. We're going to cancel you because you didn't have your hat off during the pledge. Student council announcement. Who wants to give the announcement? Scavenger hunt, because I know there's some scavenger hunt things in here. Okay. You're going to get the official verbiage. Because it's supposed to have already started, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a scavenger hunt, and the schools are putting on the school, and there's a prize to get gift cards. So that will and when you get to the final school, you'll turn in, there's a winner for each grade, and you'll turn in the paper to the office and get a gift card. But the first clue is by golly gee and golly gosh, this is where your clothes are lost. So then you'll have to follow the clues to get to the final.
And they're in numerical sequence?
Yeah.
Okay, I shouldn't say anything about any clues that are in any particular classes. Shh, mum's the word. Yeah, it's kind of like all the secrets that were going around during World War II. It's kind of like, what were you doing during World War II? Write this down. People had jobs seriously, yeah, we transitioned. People had jobs in World War II that were very top secret. I mean, the expression was, loose lips sink ships. That was very much a British expression. Yeah, loose lips sink ships because there were German spies in the British population. And so they tried to find out all kinds of various different things to transfer back over to the Germans. Of course, since the British knew that, sometimes they would plant false information, which we'll get into, so that the Germans would think that they've got accurate spy information when in fact it's actually inaccurate. Okay? Another thing that the British had, which is very much meme focused for many, many years, is keep calm and carry on. Okay? Keep calm and carry on. That was the British expression, especially during the Battle of Britain when they were getting pummeled on a regular basis from the air by the German Air Force. Shanti, what was the German Air Force named? Very good. The Luftwaffe literally translates Luft meaning like air or cloud or sky, I think. And then Waffe, force. Boom. Waffe, not waffle, Waffe. Okay? Waffle would be a waffle that attacked you. That would be a really bad morning, not a good way to start. Yeah, so spies and so forth. Yeah, let's get to this. You guys ready? Let's go. Like I say, I think we're in good shape. It's like, oh my gosh, yeah, because of the disparity in talking about advisory in the second period, yeah, that took a little longer there. So we've got World War II basically taking place in two theaters. And if you talk about the European theater, include North Africa there, that works out very well. Okay. Okay, here, hand me that top back as soon as you've read that. Okay. Okay. Not as much fighting in World War II going on in the Americas. You will see in the Americas there's going to be some incursions as far as like shipping. There will be some Nazi ships and so forth, German ships off the American coast. As far as America actually getting hit, Pearl Harbor and some of the islands in the Pacific, as well as some of the Aleutian Islands. Raise your hand if you can tell me where the heck the Aleutian Islands are. Yes? Exactly, yeah. So these are the ones that are like kicking out over here. And actually the Japanese were trying to fake out the United States, acting like they were going to attack the Aleutian Islands, like they were really significant, when in fact they were headed to Midway Island, and yeah, we got into a serious battle with them, naval forces, and we were able to prevail. So we've got major battles going on two fronts. Write this down because this is critical. Last time we talked about Hitler's stupidest decision. He had a number of them. Considering that he could have won World War II, and he did put together an army, a modern army, an air force. The Navy wasn't too bad, and they took over France like that and other European countries. I mean, he had a lot of things going for him. But among his biggest mistakes, raise your hand if you can tell me his biggest mistakes.
Right when the U.S. was at war, or Japan declared war on the U.S., then Hitler declared war on the U.S.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The United States was not, we were isolationist. After World War I, we were like, let's not fight any more wars. We pretty much stayed out of things in the 1920s and 30s, even though our president, write this down, President Franklin D. Roosevelt was very sympathetic to the British, to other democracies. Conspiracy theories say he set it all up so that, Hitler would make stupid decisions and the Japanese would make the stupid decisions and attack us and so forth. I think that's stretching a little bit too far. But as we'll see, there's concrete evidence to show our president wanted the Allies to win. But it would be going too far. He can't just sort of go, yeah, I'm the president. I can sign a piece of paper and declare war on Germany. No. American population was not supporting a war against Germany. Why did we go to war against Germany? Because they declared war on us. Why? Let's get to this one, because it's worth kind of thinking about. Because it's one of those weird ones, because I've already identified that was a stupid decision. Because when Hitler declared war on the United States, the biggest economic power in the country, and we were already fired up to go after Japan because they hit us. I mean, there was no question about that. But are we going to be able to be all fired up and go against Germany in Europe? Because that's not going to be an easy one. Well, once they declared war on us, the president's like, all right, let's do this. Now notice this. In World War II, you'll be putting this in your notes, a lot of you guys already know this. There were people, the United States military establishment, the president and so forth, that were like all afraid that the Japanese were going to invade on the West Coast. So if you were Japanese heritage in Washington or Oregon, or California, you're going to be packed up and sent to I'm going to say concentration camp, because that's what they call the German ones, and they're like really, really, really bad. Ours were detention centers for sure, and you couldn't just get up and leave those. Okay? But we didn't do the same to the German population. I mean, there was some anti-German, feelings and so forth in World War II, but they didn't get the same kind of a treatment. And the United States will put a lot of effort. We saw already. Raise your hand if you can tell me, what was the first area that the United States military actually engaged in combat with German forces and pushed them back? No, it wasn't the first one. It wasn't France. That was D-Day, 1944. It's going to be North Africa. Yeah. And I may be showing a clip. There's a famous movie called Casablanca. Yeah, if you know anything about it, it's like this, Humphrey Bogart, and anyway. And it's set in Vichy French, German-occupied North Africa before the arrival of the Americans. It's a Hollywood movie that basically is trying to sort of convince Americans that it's worth fighting and dying for French people. If you got a Hollywood movie saying that, then, that's an important thing. And that was the first place that we were engaged. Did we make a difference in North Africa? Heck yeah. Did we make a difference in attacking in France? Heck yeah. So that was a big, stupid error on the part of Hitler's. Did we kick the Germans out of Poland and Eastern Europe? Not even close. Who did that? The Soviet Union. So we get back to the question. I want you to really think about this, because this has kind of boggled my mind over years and years and years. Why would you do that, Hitler? Why? Here is the best answer I can come up with. You ready? When Hitler poured all of his resources into fighting the Soviet Union, the Soviets poured most of their resources into fighting Germany, which makes sense, because that's where the attack is coming. But let's look at this bigger picture right here. The Soviets, you can write this down, the Soviets kept some of their military resources, some of their army, in reserve in the eastern part. Why? They weren't at war in the east. Hitler's ally, Japan, make sure you have this, had not declared war on the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union had not declared war on Japan. So they were, negative toward each other, but they weren't at war. But nevertheless, Stalin, in charge of the Soviet Union, didn't want to take a chance. He kept troops in reserve. Fine, great. So Hitler, if the United States is at war with Japan, and was Hitler able to really help Japan out with providing resources for the Japanese in their fight with the United States? No. Why did he do it? The best answer I can come up with is to sort of show support and loyalty for Japan so that the Soviets will continue thinking that maybe they're going to have to use those troops against Japan in a later fight. That's not a real good payoff for declaring war against the United States. Because, again, I ask, in retrospect, did Japan actually help Germany at all in World War II? No. I don't think so. Did the United States help Hitler's enemies in Europe? Big time. Big time. I think that was a big, big mistake. Okay?
Well, what about, so you said that, the Soviet Union is pouring all of their resources into the fight with Germany?
Poured most of their resources.
Right, but then they have that
Reserve, yeah, in like Siberia and on the East Coast.
But, well, I don't know, I don't know how I'm trying to say this, but maybe when, Japan declared war on the United States, was thinking that the U.S. was just putting all of their resources into Japan.
That's feasible. That's feasible.
Other countries pour all their resources?
Sure, no, I mean, that actually makes sense. I like that. Let me see if I can explain that or repeat what you've just said. By Germany, it helps Japan out, again, Because when Germany declares war on the United States, that helps Japan out by sort of saying, okay, watch out, United States, you can't pour all your resources into the fight against Japan because we may attack you. Although the United States, is the United States going to take seriously a threat from Germany? No. Why not? Could the German Air Force reach the United States? Did the German Navy have like an aircraft carrier capacity that they could dominate in the Atlantic Ocean? No, as we'll find out, their Navy is not going to be well matched during this war. There'll be a little bit of an echo when we get to the details there. They'll have submarines, U-boats, and they'll sink ships. But the Allies are going to have a technological innovation that will give them a heads up when it comes to Navy, to the German U-boats. It's already in the list. Some of you guys have already spotted that. What is it? I'll give you a clue. Dolphin. Sonar. Echolocation. We will have developed sonar so we can detect dolphins in the water. Yes, we can detect German U-boats in the water. And that's a huge advantage because before that, the Germans were like, if they have the U-boat underneath the water, they're invisible. And then they can pop up, sink ships, and then dive down deeply. We'll see that technological advantage. So, again, I don't think the Germans really got much out of that. Yeah, because they weren't a credible threat to the United States directly. Japan was for a while, as long as they had aircraft carriers. Okay? All right. So we've got this scene going on here. Whoops. We've got the scene going on in the Pacific, and where we last left off, I think we were able to like move the map enough. The map was like sort of helpful because it's like it didn't really show vast armies moving across continents because that's not how it worked. I mean, every time you saw a little bit of a blip where the United States had taken over an island, just count the casualties. Tens of thousands of United States Marine and naval personnel. Oh, and a lot of Japanese too. Because the Japanese soldiers, I think you've already got a sense of like the Japanese military. Were those tough, tenacious fighters? Oh my gosh, yes. They were tough against the Chinese. They were tough against everybody they fought against. They were not easy to tangle with. And especially if you're trying to unhinge them from control of an island. It's like D-Day over and over and over again. Keep that in mind because one of the big issues that comes out of this unit, and some of you guys are writing papers on this, is when we get to the point where it's like, oh, we got another technological advantage. Oh, what's this one? Oh, it's a really big technological advantage. It goes, boom! President Truman's like, wow, I wonder if I should use that. I wonder if I should. If I use that against Japan and hit them with nuclear explosions, will that save American lives? His calculation is, I think so. Because as tenaciously as the Japanese fought for control of islands off their coast that had airfields that can be used for bombing, can you imagine how tough the Japanese would have fought to defend their homeland islands? And it wasn't just Japanese military. You can put this down. When you talk about the Japanese population, many of them were highly militarized. And the government was feeding them misinformation that basically the Americans will treat you horribly, rape you, pillage you, do terrible things to you, so you'd better either fight to the death or just kill yourself. And we actually saw that in Okinawa when the United States defeated the Japanese military. There was a fair amount of civilian population there, and a lot of them were jumping off cliffs and taking their own lives. So American intelligence is like, whoa, we're going to have our hands full trying to do amphibious assaults against the Japanese mainland. And when the Japanese are fighting against our naval forces as we get closer, granted they didn't have as many aircraft at that time as you'll see, but if they did have any aircraft, they were going to load those aircraft up with, let me see if you guys know this already, because it's going to be in your notes here pretty soon. What do you call it when you put a bunch of explosives in a Japanese aircraft and send them on a one-way like 9/11 type mission? Kamikaze, exactly. It means like fire wind or something like that anyway. And they were like targeting ships like the Saratoga, which is a United States aircraft carrier. Our aircraft carriers were, you can always tell, like if it's the name of an important battle from U.S. history, like Yorktown. Let me see. Saratoga, obviously, from the American Revolution. That's what they named their aircraft carriers. This one, this Saratoga was involved, and I'll show you the video, the visuals later. I was involved in some serious attacks by the Japanese, because the Japanese, they got their planes in there like, hit the carriers, because we know how valuable the carriers are. If it wasn't for the aircraft carriers, the Japanese wouldn't have been able to hit Pearl Harbor. If it wasn't for the American aircraft carriers, we wouldn't be able to like sink Japanese aircraft carriers in the Pacific. And so this boat got hit and hit and hit, nearly sunk, basically incapacitated, a lot of crew killed. So they had to send it stateside for repairs and more crew, just in time for a young man who just graduated from Idaho Falls High School, had just been through military training in Oklahoma and San Diego and Whidbey Island, to get reassigned to the Saratoga. So my dad was on the Saratoga as it's heading to Japan for the final stages of the war. Not when he was on it, no. It was really interesting to read his letters and so forth from his military training and while he was on the boat and so forth. Was he involved in active fighting? Ultimately, no. Because by the time they got close enough, boom, boom. 2 atomic bombs, the Japanese got out within a month or so. But it's always an interesting thing, because you sort of look at history and you're like, but for atomic weapons, maybe my dad would have been on the Saratoga and it would have been potentially hit as part of an invasion force, a very costly invasion force by the United States against Japan. And if he was hit and taken out, well, I wouldn't be having this conversation with you now, would I? Yeah. I mean, I look at it's like if you do enough survey of your family's history, you can like, but for, let me see, mustard gas, that was really bad. But for my mother's father, who was mustard gassed during World War I, I'm not so sure he would have married a nurse. And I'm not so sure my dad would have necessarily survived World War II. There were a lot that didn't. If you were a graduating high school class of 1941, or 42, or 43, the odds are you're going to be involved potentially in much more combat. Dad graduated in 44, so he was at the tail end of that. So there's interesting stories that we go through here. Let's talk about, in the handout that I got there for you, the nature of war. I'm going to be talking about the nature of war. World War II is chock full, more so, I think, with the possible exception of World War I, of real heavy considerations of changes in the nature of warfare. Okay? Write this down. Technology makes all the difference, and I think I highlighted that a little bit before. In World War I, advances in technology helped the defense. By World War II, advances in technology are going to, I think, help the offense. I'll explain. On the Western Front in World War I, you had the British and the French on one side of the trenches. You had the Germans on the other side of the trenches. They were both fairly equally matched as far as industrial technology capacity. What were the innovations that were at play in the trenches on the Western Front in World War I? Machine gun, a nice defensive weapon. Sniper rifles, okay? Trenches. Yeah, guns, that kind of thing. We saw a little bit of an inkling in like tanks and airplanes, but by World War II, write this down, tanks and airplanes are much more innovative. They have greater armor, they've got greater protection, and particularly the airplanes, they've got greater capacity to bring a lot of death deep into your enemy's territory. And let me give you some specifics, okay? Because when we go into this, I'm going to give you some examples. And we got the German Stuka Bombers here. The French and the British and the Americans and the Russians are going to be able to have that too. The Russians are not going to be like in World War I, disadvantaged because their industrialization is not up to speed. Stalin took care of that. He made it a top priority over everything else to industrialize his country, or as George Orwell will put it, to build sufficient number of windmills, because that was a national security issue. The Soviets knew that someday they were going to be potentially attacked by a revived Germany, and that happened. Were they ready for it? Well, ready enough, at great cost, they were able to win that. So when we talk about some of these innovations, the Russians will have aircraft, the British, the French until they're knocked out of the war, and the Americans too.
So those are the planes that named like that or fireman, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, and the way that, just, I mean, technically, a Stuka bomber, and there's different kinds of bombers. You're like, oh my gosh, do we have to know the difference between tactical weapons and strategic weapons? Yes. Actually, raise your hand if you can tell me. Tactical weapons, strategic weapons. Go ahead.
Tactical weapons are like that, or the pipe. Basically, bombs all about cookies and milk, so like you want to keep on.
And what kind of engagement are you going to use them in?
Like
Close air support, a battle. Yeah, think of like a battle. Whereas when we get to, let's see here, these are going to be like strategic. They're going to be more just a strategic capacity. You're like, what the heck strategic? You want to give it a shot?
that's where you just drop a crap ton of bombs.
On what?
Preferably factories.
There you go.
But
Okay.
anywhere.
Okay, no, that's a good point. Write that down. Tactical, think battlefield. That's probably a good synonym for that. When we get in, and we'll develop this further because we're going to talk about different kinds of things that are going to be used for this. Strategic weapons are going to try to cripple the enemy's ability to, like, engage in a long-term fight. So you're going to have destruction of factories. And since the bombs weren't really super precise back in those days, and if you had a bunch of people living around the factories, it's like, oh, sucks to be you. Yeah. Port facilities, railway facilities. So, put this down. You ready? Ultimately, the United States will play a big, big role in winning the war because how many of our factories are going to be strategically destroyed by German air bombers? 0. How many German factories do you suppose by the end of the war are going to be destroyed by British and American and Russian bombers? Yeah. I mean, there's the difference. The United States, write this down. This is so critical. The United States, why can we fight 2 wars on both sides? Because even though we're not able to put a bunch of soldiers in to help the Soviets, we will be able to help them with some equipment. Although, give props to the Soviets. They're going to be able to manufacture most of the equipment they're going to need during the war with those factories that Stalin had forcibly built way behind the lines in and around the Ural Mountains. Okay? You've got to make enough stuff in order to be successful in a war. Why is China today producing a massive naval and air fleet? They want Taiwan back. I mean, they're not, yeah. I mean, they're constantly doing incursions and so forth by sea, and their air force is going in there. They're checking. They're like, United States, are you really going to help Taiwan? I mean, I took a survey of you guys and the other 11th graders. I'm like, wow, Taiwan, your days are numbered. Because I don't sense a real swell of support on the part of the United States population to pay the cost of what it would take to defend Taiwan against China, against a resurgent, powerful, they call it conventional warfare. In fact, this is a good war to describe the difference. Are you ready? Conventional warfare versus nuclear warfare. Once you got that, the understanding of the difference between those two, it's going to help in the long term as we go all the way up to the present. Conventional warfare, bombs, tanks, aircraft, guns. Stuff that blows up and kills people. Got it? Nuclear warfare. Really big bombs. More damage. But there's a psychological, like, ethical thing. If you go nuke, when we get to the Cold War, we're going to see, if you go nuke and the other side has the capability of going nuke, goodbye world. I mean, seriously. I mean, you guys don't sense it as much as I do when I was in high school. When I was in high school, we had the Soviets, we were in the Cold War. If either side decided that they wanted to go to war with each other, it was going to be nuclear, because we would tap into our nuclear resources. And we would basically say to the Soviets, don't mess with our friends in Western Europe and other parts of the world, because if you do, we're going to go nuke on you. And of course, then we knew they were going to go nuke on us. So we would have extermination of human population in order to protect our friends in West Berlin. Is the United States prepared to go nuclear to defend our allies today? Officially on the papers, yeah. In Europe, yeah. That's the pledge that all the countries have given. Would we do that for Taiwan? Have we done it? Mm-hmm. Will we continue to do it? No. It's a good question. The Chinese are asking themselves the question all the time. Poke, poke, poke. America, are you really going to do anything about it? I mean, if the Soviets, the Russians, if Putin took over, I don't know, Crimea, part of Ukraine, would we go nuke on? We didn't even do any conventional warfare and things like, we're like, shame on you, sanctions. Stop doing that.
Isn't that the doomsday clock is for? The countdown to nuclear war?
Yeah, you got a bunch of scientists and other people who are watching kind of like the scenario when things get really hot. They're like, okay, everybody, we're going to move it to like 5 seconds before doomsday. You know. Actually, if somebody ever gets rid of the doomsday clock and says, oh, everything's fine now, the world is safe, I would be concerned. Yeah. Yeah. People, oh my gosh, some of the worst April Fool's jokes. It's like, we're getting attacked by the Soviet Union. Ah! You know, what the heck? That would not be good. That's not funny. Yeah, I think like somebody, like some TV news program, like in the Seattle area, was like, Mount Rainier just exploded. That's not funny because someday Mount Rainier will explode, and it will not be pleasant for the people around it. I think I read something this morning. Just kidding. No, I just. Yeah, Yellowstone would be. Yeah, it would be massive. So, Stuka Bombers. Basically, the idea here is you got a plane. Tactical support for the most part. Write this down. Tactical support. They don't have big, huge, massive gas tanks. You need more gas tank to fly a longer distance to drop lots of bombs. Stuka Bombers are going to be taking off from nearby airfields and providing close support for battlefield. And we gave one of the examples for Stuka Bomber attack is going to be part of the Blitzkrieg, right? Let me see. Who was it? Actually, it was Sad in the other class. I think Merrick decided, Jersey decided he was over here, and he's like, we're going to be the Poles in 1939. Yeah. So Merrick, Commandant Merrick, I'm like, so Merrick, where are you going to hit the Poles on their line? He goes, Jersey. And boom, boom. That's what the Stuka Bombers do. And it's frightening to hear that, because you just like hear, they come down, in order to get more accuracy on their dropping of the things, they like dive toward the target, release the bombs. The bombs continue on a, it's gravity. And when they get close enough, some of the bombs don't blow up. There's a device in there that's like very sophisticated that when it gets close enough to the land, it blows up, kills people. Some of them that like penetrate like into the land and so forth, those are dangerous. You don't want to be like in a field where you're like, ooh, that looks like a World War II era bomb that hasn't exploded. Bing, bing, bing. Don't do that. Okay? So they will aim at particular points. Boom, boom, boom. Artillery. Howitzers. Those are the German artillery. Improved. Not that they didn't have bad artillery and so forth during World War I, but very good artillery. Okay? So you're going to like fire them off, but put them in a particular location. Why did they want to hit? Who was getting hit in here last time? They were. Oh, you guys were attacking them. Oh, that's right. Was it Shanti or Gavin was like, Gavin's like, yeah, Gavin. It's like, what kind of defense can you put up against a blitzkrieg? He's like crawling to the ground or something. It's like, yeah, it's not going to work. Why? Haley, why hit Gavin? Let's just recap on this one. Why hit this particular spot? Go ahead. Go for it. Exactly. Yeah, so you can encircle. And that's what happened. I remember watching like a map or so forth of how the Germans played out in the Battle of Poland and so forth. You had all these different incursion points, and then they'd rush through with the tanks, encircle, and either kill all the remaining Polish forces or take their surrendering troops, and then deal with them later. Okay? That's a blitzkrieg attack method. Yeah, the Battle of the Bulge, I mean, there's so many different battles. It's always tough because like sometimes students are like, you haven't talked about World War II enough, Mr. Hansen. I'm like, Battle of the Bulge is near the end of the war. The Germans are losing. It's in, it's like right in here. We've already got plenty of troops in France. It's the winter of like 44, and the Germans are running out of gas. I don't know why, because we've been like, boom, boom, strategically bombing them. And so there is a deposit of gasoline. And the Germans are like, okay, we got it. It's the last gasp effort. They punch through, and they do get through. It's a bulge in the lines. They get through, but they don't quite get far enough. And ultimately, all those tanks and forces that they use to engage in that battle are going to be lost. And it'll actually make it easier for us as we continue pushing across the Rhine deeper into Germany. Because they were running out of gasoline. How?
What do you mean how? You gotta have like.
Danton, how do you run out of gasoline?
I don't go to the gas station for.
Do you use your car? I mean, it's like,
I use my dad's.
use your dad's car so you don't run out of gasoline. If you use your tanks and other equipment and so forth, the gasoline gets burned up, you need more.
No, but shouldn't they have more?
They should, but if they don't, what kinds of things? Like, what do the United States do to prevent Japan from continuing using imported gasoline to attack the Chinese? I told you this. We put an oil embargo on them. And what do the Japanese do? At Pearl Harbor. It's like if you're like, you know, somebody, let's say your sibling is watering the garden and you put a kink in the hose. They're like, I'm supposed to water the garden, you jerk. And they come over and they pop you in the face. What are you going to do? Are you going to go, on December 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy, my younger brother popped me in the face because I was pulling a practical joke on him? Give me a break. I don't know. Was it worth it? I don't know. Was it worth it to Japan? Yeah, at the end of World War II, it's kind of like you lose. You lose your empire and everything, and it's like, oh, guess what else you lose? You lose a little bit of that, like, militaristic, like, fanaticism, and then Japan just becomes like a really cool country that's like into, like, I don't know, Hello Kitty and Nintendo and other kinds of, you know, neat things like that, you know. And the samurai tradition is not as scary anymore. Yes?
Didn't Japan, like, they put a lot of stress on doing that, like, for their country, with all the sort of PC, like, stuff like that, like, but they were, like, big.
Even before?
No, like,
Afterwards, yes.
They, yeah, really tried to make sure that they had, like, a better,
Yeah.
reputation.
They definitely wanted to focus on improving their reputation. Yeah. Yeah, we'll talk about Japan after the war, but one of the things that happens to Japan after the war, because we beat them, we come in and we're like, we're going to introduce some new things. Let's say, first of all, your military's not going to go anywhere besides Japan, because your neighbors get freaked out about that. They've had experiences with your military in their neighborhood. And then we introduce things like Besabora. Do you know what Besabora is? It's baseball. Yeah. It's and actually, I think that it was actually even introduced even before World War II, but it becomes very, very popular. Yeah, so it's like we introduce those kinds of things, and sometimes the Japanese are kind of like, and this is why sometimes they're like, they don't know anything about like military atrocities, like the rape of Nanking, because they're just like, let's not focus on anything military from way back then. Well, if you don't focus on anything military from way back when, you're not going to learn maybe some of the really bad stuff your military did. Yeah.
I think kind of funny, the company Nintendo was founded a year before Idaho became a state.
Wow. That is a long time ago. Yeah, that is a long time ago. Okay, so we got howitzers. Let's continue on with the technology. Panzer. Panzer literally translates to panther. I mentioned this before. Make sure you write this down. They got Panzer tanks. They got Tiger tanks. Do the Germans know anything about sophisticated engineering? Oh my gosh, yeah. You want a good car? I know Volkswagen's not bad, but anyway, you want like a really good car, BMW, Mercedes, and so forth. The Germans know how to do some serious engineering. And we will see, write this down. Germans were advanced in engineering technology during World War II. They came up with jet engines first. They came up with rocket technology first. Are there military applications to those things? Heck yeah. Why were they not able to build a massive jet fleet of fighters and bombers and rockets and use them to crush the British and so forth? Because they were ultimately getting strategically bombed. They were the ones, make sure you have this, they also were trying to develop nuclear weapons technology. They were moving pretty far along. If you were to take a measure of which country was further along on nuclear weapons technology, Germany had the first steps. I mean, I don't know, did they have nuclear physicists and so forth in Germany? Let me see, Einstein. Oh, but he's Jewish, and he got kicked out in the 1930s by Hitler. Thanks, Hitler, you stupid anti-Jewish person, because you crippled your own nuclear physics program. But there were other nuclear physicists in Germany still there that weren't Jews, and Einstein pointed out to President Roosevelt, you need to be aware of what's going on in Germany, because that's what those guys are going for, and if you can beat them to the punch, whoever gets the first nuclear weapon may have an advantage, and did in this case. Yeah, they had all kinds of various different things. But it's difficult because even still today, there's countries, Iran, trying to put all the different pieces together for a nuclear weapons program. It's not an easy thing to do. I don't suggest that you do a Google search on it, because you could get somebody knocking on your door to find out exactly why you're doing a Google search on developing nuclear weaponry. But you need to have the understanding, the technology, and you need to have certain component parts. Right? You need to develop a heavy water facility and so forth. It's all very, very interesting stuff. German tanks were very well made, and they were organized, write this down, into divisions. Okay? That was a very smart military innovation on the part of the Germans. They had lots and lots of tank divisions. They moved quickly, they had a lot of firepower, and they had a lot of armor protecting them. They had great tracks that could go over difficult land. They made a big difference in the Blitzkrieg attacks. So when Gavin is sitting there going, oh my gosh, this isn't going to be like World War I again. Boom, 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 and from the Stukas. Boom, boom, boom from the howitzers, and all of a sudden, what's that noise? Here come the tanks rolling in. Boom, boom, boom. Can you stop a tank with machine gun fire? Sniper fire. You're going to have to develop anti-tank technologies, tanks themselves, so you get some serious tank battles, because tanks can hit tanks. And, that's basically what you're doing. And you can also use air support to go after tanks as well. Close air support. You're like, oh, there's a tank. Boom, 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 knock him out. No. I'm going to talk about this, all right? In fact, I want to talk about this. Write this down. We came up with some tanks. Probably the one that was most produced in the United States was the Sherman tank. Here's a Sherman tank. I don't know. There's a Sherman tank, and granted, it's an old grainy black and white picture as compared to the Panzer tank. A Panzer tank, one Panzer tank versus one Sherman tank, Panzer wins. But, raise your hand if you can tell me, how come ultimately the Sherman tanks were very helpful for us winning battles in Europe? Not necessarily faster. That's it. Write it down. We had so many. Back to you, Aiden. Why did we have so many Sherman tanks? Factories. Really? What were those factories making before World War II? Stuff. Cars and other kinds of things, trucks. What were those factories making during World War II? What kind of stuff? Too vague. You've got to have. Tanks. What kind of tanks? Sherman tanks. So even though it's not necessarily the best, if you got 5 Sherman tanks versus 1 Tiger tank or a Panzer tank, boom, boom, boom. Yeah, we can try to hit them from all kinds of different sides. So again, our manufacturing capability during World War II is going to help a great deal. We build tons of these things. Tons. And we're not getting our factories bombed from the skies like the Germans ultimately are. Strategic weapons. United States B-29 bombers. These are the kinds of things that we're going to be flying from airfields in Britain, not that far away, ultimately, when we get these airfields, oh my gosh, by the time the Americans get involved in World War II in Europe, we're going to have so many American airmen with so many American bombers flying regularly over into Germany to bomb their factories, their port facilities, their cities. We bomb during the daytime. You can write that down. The Americans bomb during the daytime. Yeah. Which is kind of like, which would you rather, during the day or during the night? Probably in the night is better. The British are going to bomb during the night. They're going to do their strategic bombing during the night. They'll use Lancaster bombers and other kinds of, big aircraft things that can go a fair distance, carry a heavy payload, and drop it. Boom, boom, boom. They fly at night, we fly during the day. Once things are going our way, it is going to be relentless on the Germans. Their capability is going to be crushed in order to carry out a war. Okay? Now, this is interesting. I like this picture. This is the British Lancaster bomber. You can see this is the RAF, Royal Air Force insignia, a little red and then the white and the blue with a yellow or gold around it. These other two flying next to it is actually a very good thing to point out, because what kind of defenses do you have against a high altitude bomber? Machine guns, right. Pew, 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 pew. No. I don't have it on here, but you can come up with anti-aircraft guns, sometimes referred to as flak, and they're not really super precise. What they do, and they have those centered around cities and factories and port facilities, like really high-value targets, and as they see the incoming flights coming in, they're like boom, boom, boom. They just shoot it up. They fill the sky with all kinds of blowing up pieces of shrapnel and so forth. Write that down, and they can take out some of the incoming bombers. Your best weapon against a slow-moving bomber is other planes, maneuverable planes, fighter aircraft. Here's the German Messerschmitt fighter aircraft. Every country that we talked about, the British, the United States, Russians, Germans, Japanese, have these fighter aircraft. They're fast, they're maneuverable, they've got really good guns, and to defend against a bomber attack, they fly in and take out the bombers. Which is why our early United States bomber attacks, strategic bomber attacks against Europe, we had very high casualties. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like you're like, it's like taking a school bus through like a war zone or something. It was like, they don't have a chance. We would have guys, we would have like our fighter aircraft accompanying them, but sometimes the German fighter aircraft would come up, shoot our bombers, and then they try to draw our fighter aircraft away into like a little dogfight. It's like, ooh, let's have a little dogfight over here. Meanwhile, our bombers are like, can we get some help here? Somebody might know this one. There was a new component in our military air capacity. They're called the Red Tails. And they were given an opportunity to accompany our heavy aircraft flying over, and they were given the task of stick with the bombers, protect the bombers, at all costs protect the bombers. What was unique about these Red Tail fighter aircraft that actually, like, they did their job, they won their props, they followed their orders? Exactly, they were African American. This was an opportunity African Americans had given to them by the United States military to prove themselves, and they did. Because before that, they were given jobs, and we'll get into this a little bit more. They were given jobs like in the Navy, you were a cook. In the Army, you were like, support personnel and so forth. It's like, didn't you look at the history of like the Civil War? Who made the difference in helping the Union beat the South and the Confederacy? I think those were black soldiers. I think they knew how to fight pretty well. And so the story of the Red Tails, fighter aircraft for the United States Army Air Corps is what they were called at that time. Later they will be referred to as the Air Force. They proved their worth and they protected the bombers. Got that? And of course, protecting the British coastal area against German bombers were Spitfires and Hurricanes. I think this is a Hurricane and that's a Spitfire. Little like zzz, zzz, zzz. Literally, Churchill, Prime Minister for Britain, is going to say, never in the course of history have so many been so grateful to so few for a victory. Because when the Germans were like hitting Britain, boom, 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 basically trying to get the British to quit in World War II after the French had been beaten, all that the British had were their fighter aircraft, flak. Oh, but wait, something else. The British had radar. Write this down. This is a technological development that's really going to help the British defend itself during World War II. This gives you eyes on the sky to know when to use those precious fuel reserves to get your fighters up into the sky. Because your fighters aren't going to do any good on the airfield, but if they're up in the sky and the enemy's not there, they're wasting gas. So when do you get the men from their beds back into the planes to go up in the skies to fight against incoming German bombers? When they're detected by the radar. How does the radar work? Well, sonar is underwater. Radar is like, what animal uses radar to figure out how not to bump into things? Bats. Yeah, dolphins use it in the water. It's called sonar, yeah. Echolocation. I mean, it's like, what is your thing? Is your like watery or is it like air? It's basically the same principle. Yeah, exactly. Air dolphins, there we go. So you have across Britain, and it continues up into the northern part of Britain because northern British cities like Liverpool that I mentioned where my mom lived nearby, they were also getting hit as well. And they were getting hit from German air bases that had been established in places like Norway and Denmark as well as the Netherlands. I mean, all those places made perfect sense for the Germans to get control of them because they could use them for bombing raids against the British. Okay? So when the radar detected incoming squadrons of German bombers, up would come the fighters. Oh, and at the same time, if you were in a community, like if you were in school, what would happen? Put on your gas masks. Seriously, because there was a fear that maybe the Germans would drop bombs and some of those bombs would be laden with illegal, whatever, gas, yeah. And actually, they didn't really do too much of that. They didn't use so much mustard gas. In fact, I'm not even sure they used it at all during World War II. But nevertheless, the British, and they went into, you can write this down, they went into dugout cellars. If you were in London, you had the whole underground subway system that you could go into. And that was pretty good. That was nice and deep. Sometimes people would have them out in their backyards. They would have like an air raid shelter in their backyard, oftentimes filled with water or mud or whatever, but I don't know. Better than being in a house, because if a house took a direct hit, man, you're cooked. So you would have all those kind of like civil defense things in play so that the population didn't get hit. What would hit the German bombers? Aircraft. Aircraft. The British would go up there to try to take them out. This was actually, write this down, this was a mistake on the part of the Germans. One of Hitler's mistakes. Initially, the German attacks against Britain went after the British airfields. Smart decision. Take out the British airfields, then they won't be able to send the aircraft up into the sky. And if you can destroy a lot of the aircraft on the bases, all the better. But eventually Hitler got onto his mind, it's like, no, I'm going to break the will of the British people. Break their will? But the British have a great little, keep calm and carry on. When are they saying that to themselves? After Hitler decided, you know what? We're going to bomb the city of London. We're going to bomb population centers. Write that down. The Germans decided to bomb population centers. Rather than go after really strategic targets like airfields and other military installations, they're using it to destroy the British will. What do the British do in response to that? Well, some of them are like, let's get the kids out of here. The Pevensey kids, if you guys know anything about that, they're going to be sent up to some old guy that's got some closet way up in the countryside. That's the whole Narnia thing that C.S. Lewis was writing about. Others are going to put their kids on boats. You can write this down. British will put some kids on boats. I knew one guy, he spent like the entire World War II in New Zealand as a kid. I mean, that's a long boat ride. They were trying to keep the kids safe, so they like packed up their kids. They went them all back to New Zealand and Australia and so forth. Although it was really bad because they didn't do that as much later on. Why do you suppose that is? A boat full of orphans? I mean, seriously, that's going to be able to get all the way to its destination, right? No, they lost some boatfuls of orphans sunk by German submarines. Well, if you're a German submarine commander, you look, you see a ship, you're like, I don't know what's in it. It's the Lusitania. Passengers. You know, remember World War I? What was on the Lusitania that went down into the ocean after it was sunk by a German sub? Passengers and other stuff. So they don't know. So after a while, they were like, okay, we'll just get the kids up. My mom talks about how, like, you know, growing up as like your age in the outskirts of Liverpool, they would have like people from London who were living in their house for a while. I mean, that's what they did. They're like, get the people out of London, especially the kids, get them out of the places that are being targeted, get them to safer ground. Go to Narnia, you know? I don't know. But that was a mistake because eventually, you know whose cities are going to be hit and population centers are going to be hit ultimately the worst? Germans. Because the British are going to do the same thing. And the Americans hit population centers. Boom, boom. It's either, let's see if we can break their morale, or maybe it's simple payback. Payback's a bear when you get into warfare. Okay? Other innovations, let's write this down. Radio is going to be a very, very important innovation. And this is huge as far as like all kinds of different communication, long-term communication, battlefield communication. What you have here is an example of a field signal corps operator. I think this is like for the United States. We've got the guy with his backpack there. Basically, it's a big old radio. And then his company officer is the one communicating with headquarters. So you don't have to send like, you guys seen 1917? Did they have radio, a way to communicate to people? No, they didn't. They sent runners. You know, they sent pigeons. They sent all kinds of things like that. But now we're going to have radio operators, which is going to be very, very helpful. That communication component is a very, very key thing. So you've got eyes on the ground, and you can have like up-to-date information on what to do. Literally, you could have somebody out here going, okay, I'm in this position and so forth. There's a whole German thing and so forth. Hit him with some air target. Hit him with some air support. Send the fighters in and blow the snot out of those guys. You got that? Radio communication. In the Pacific, I love this one. This is one of my favorites. In the United States military and the Marine Corps, fighting on the islands, the Japanese, of course, are listening in on their radios, and they're trying to intercept. Everyone's trying to intercept each other's messages, right? If you intercept a German message that is not coded in any kind of way, all you need is a guy that knows how to speak German and translate it and go, hey, the Germans are doing this, that, and so forth. Sucks to be the ones that... But we use American Navajo. How many of you guys were aware that we use Navajo? Okay, you've heard about this. Yeah. They don't have to change their language. They know their language. Do the Germans know it? Or, excuse me, the Japanese, because these were used primarily in the Pacific. No. So the commander would give an order to a Navajo signal corps guy, and he would radio that to another Navajo, who would then translate it back to whatever commander was receiving the message. It worked. It was like almost, I want to say 100% perfect, because the Japanese couldn't break the code. They couldn't decipher it. Very important. Deciphering codes. It's amazing how geeks can play such an important role in warfare. Oh yeah! And I use that positively when I say that. The Germans, oh my gosh, engineers, tech, they came up with an amazing Enigma machine that was a ciphering thing that was just par excellence. I mean, it literally took every letter and rotated it on a regular kind of basis and so forth. And as long as you had an Enigma machine on your end of it, so you had these in submarines, you had them all over the place in the German military and communications, and you just had to adjust it to whatever that daily adjustment was. And the other side would just sound like bleh, you know. They couldn't make anything of it. How on earth are the Allies ever going to be able to crack that code? Well, one, they have to get one. The Allies were able to get a German Enigma machine from a captured sub.